I didn't expect it to happen, and if you had asked me just a few months ago, I would have laughed at the thought. I mean, David was my best friend's husband. He was married to Emily, someone I had known for years, someone I trusted deeply. But then again, life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? The lines we draw between what's acceptable and what's not become blurry when emotions get involved. It all started with a quiet evening at Emily's place. She had invited me over as usual. The three of us, Emily, David, and I, often spent our weekends together. We'd eat dinner, talk about work, or just relax, letting time pass without much thought. It was comforting, predictable, and I thought I was content. But that night felt different. Maybe it was the way the light hit his face, casting shadows in just the right way. Maybe it was the way his laugh made my heart beat a little faster, or how his eyes lingered just a second too long on mine. Or maybe it was just me, being too caught up in my own head, thinking about how things had shifted between us in the past few weeks. We were sitting in the living room, sipping wine, talking about nothing and everything all at once. Emily had excused herself to take a call, leaving David and me alone. I don't know what it was, whether it was the alcohol, the fact that Emily wasn't there, or just the strange intimacy that had developed between us, but when he looked at me, everything else seemed to fade away. I wasn't sure what happened first, the spark in his eyes or the way I felt my pulse quicken. He leaned in a little closer, and in that instant I knew. I knew what was about to happen. I knew I should stop it, that this was wrong, that crossing that line would change everything. But my body didn't listen to reason. Before I could say a word, he was there. His lips brushed against mine, softly at first, almost tentative, as though he was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The kiss deepened, and I let it happen. His hands gently cupped my face, pulling me closer, and I let him. I was lost in the feeling, the heat of the moment, the intensity of something forbidden and yet so intoxicating. Every touch, every movement felt amplified. I was trembling, my body responding to his in ways I couldn't control. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would ruin everything, but in that moment, all I could focus on was the way he made me feel alive, desired, wanted. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to pull away, but I couldn't find the strength to do it. When we finally broke the kiss, both of us breathless, I could see the conflict in his eyes. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty. I could feel it too. What had we done? What did this mean? I opened my mouth to say something, to apologize, to explain it away, but no words came. Instead, I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. The tension in the room was suffocating, and we both knew that things could never go back to the way they were. There was no going back. I wish I could tell you that the night ended when I pulled away, that the moment passed, and we both acted as if nothing happened. But that's not how it went. Instead, I lay awake, turning over every detail in my mind, obsessing over what had just happened and what it meant. When I finally woke up the next morning, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. I felt sick to my stomach, guilt, shame, regret all rushed in at once, threatening to suffocate me. I lay there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? The lines had been crossed. There was no going back. David wasn't just some guy, he was Emily's husband. And I had kissed him. I had kissed him, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The weight of the secret felt unbearable, like a burden pressing down on my chest. I tried to convince myself that it was just a kiss, that it didn't mean anything. It was an accident. A mistake. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The way he kissed me, the way it felt, the connection between us wasn't just physical. There was something deeper, something unspoken, something neither of us had acknowledged until now. And I couldn't ignore it. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, each second like a flashback. The way his lips had gently brushed mine at first, testing if I would pull away. But I didn't. I hadn't. And that moment, that small decision, had changed everything. The passion had ignited so suddenly, like an uncontrollable fire. It felt like I was drowning in it, and at the same time, I didn't want to come up for air. I didn't want to stop. But now that I had, the reality of it felt so much worse. I felt guilty for Emily. She was my best friend, my confidant. She trusted me. I had been there for her through everything, her joy, her pain, her fears. And now I had betrayed that trust in the most intimate way possible. I couldn't even begin to imagine how she would feel if she found out. The thought of losing her friendship was more painful than any guilt I was feeling. But what scared me more was that I wasn't just guilty for her, I was guilty for myself too. I had wanted it. I hadn't stopped it. And now I didn't know what to do with that. Later that day, Emily and David acted as though nothing had changed. We sat together at the kitchen table, the three of us eating lunch like we always did. But I couldn't shake the tension that hung in the air. Every glance I stole at David, every time our eyes met, it was like an electric charge shot through my body. And the worst part? He didn't seem uncomfortable at all. He didn't act like it was a mistake. In fact, when our eyes met, there was a spark of recognition between us, something that hadn't been there before. And it terrified me. It made me realize that he felt it too. The way he looked at me when Emily wasn't paying attention sent shivers down my spine. I could see it in his eyes. There was a quiet understanding between us now, something that couldn't be undone. And that scared me more than anything else. I tried to carry on like everything was normal. I laughed at Emily's jokes, joined in on their conversation, but inside, I was a mess. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, as I struggled to push the guilt away. I couldn't get past it. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. The next few days were worse. I avoided David as much as I could, but every time I saw him, that same unspoken tension hung between us. We didn't speak about what happened, not directly. But we didn't need to. We both knew. And as much as I tried to pretend it wasn't there, I couldn't ignore it. It was like we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting for one of us to say something, to acknowledge what we had done. But neither of us did. And that's when the phone call came. It was Emily. She sounded upbeat at first, chatting about her day, but then she suddenly asked me, almost casually, if I was okay. I could hear the underlying concern in her voice, but I wasn't sure how to respond. I had no idea what to say. How could I explain that I wasn't okay? That I was struggling with something I could never tell her? That the line between us had been crossed, and I was terrified of what that meant? I told her I was fine, of course. I lied. I didn't know what else to do. But the lie felt like a weight on my chest, suffocating me with every word. As the days went on, I realized that I couldn't keep avoiding David. The attraction between us had grown stronger, and the guilt I felt only intensified the more I saw him. It was like we were walking around with a secret that was too big to ignore, too powerful to deny. Every time he walked into the room, my heart skipped a beat. Every time he smiled at me, my stomach fluttered. I was terrified of what this meant, but at the same time, I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to stop. Then one evening, everything came to a head. Emily had gone out for the evening with some friends, leaving me and David alone in the house. I told myself I wouldn't stay. I told myself I would leave. But I didn't. We sat in the living room, not saying much at first. The silence was deafening. And then, suddenly, David leaned in, his hand resting gently on my knee. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. He was so close now, his breath warm against my skin, and all I could do was watch him, paralyzed by the tension. He looked at me, his gaze intense, and for a moment, I thought he was going to kiss me again. I don't want to hurt her, I whispered, my voice shaky. I know, he replied softly. I don't either. But I can't ignore this. I can't ignore what we have. His words hit me like a wave. And for the first time, I realized that we were in this together. We had both crossed that line. We had both chosen to let this happen. And now, there was no going back. As he leaned in to kiss me again, I didn't stop him. I couldn't. Because, in that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to.